Every betrayal story starts the same way, with someone who thought they knew the person lying next to them. This one is no different. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is what happened to me, because odds are, some part of you watching this has felt it too. That gut punch moment when the floor disappears. When the person who promised to choose you every day turns out to have been choosing someone else in secret. But this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens after, when grief turns into rage, and rage gets an offer it was never supposed to receive. A billion-dollar offer, wrapped in kindness, delivered by a man whose real business had nothing to do with kindness at all. By the end of this, you're going to ask yourself a question you can't easily answer. If someone offered you the power to destroy the people who broke you, completely, quietly, and untraceably, would you take it? I did. And I need to tell you exactly how that decision unraveled, piece by piece, until I didn't recognize the man in the mirror anymore. Stay with me, because the twist in the middle of this story isn't the one you're expecting, and the ending isn't the one I expected either. Chapter 1. The Charger. Marriage has a rhythm. You stop noticing the details after a while, the sound of her keys in the bowl by the door, the smell of her coffee, the way she hums when she thinks no one's listening. 8 years of that rhythm makes you feel safe. It makes you stupid, too, in a way I didn't understand until that Tuesday. I was 34. I worked in commercial insurance, the kind of job that pays well enough to buy a decent house in a decent suburb, and just badly enough that you never stop working for it. My wife, Elena, ran a small interior design business out of a studio downtown. We built a life that looked, from the outside, like the version of adulthood everyone's parents warned them they might never get. That morning started like every other. Coffee, a rushed goodbye kiss, traffic on the interstate that made me grip the wheel a little too tight. I was halfway to the office when I patted my jacket pocket and realized my phone charger, the only one that fit my ancient car charger port, was still sitting on the kitchen counter. I almost didn't go back. I want you to sit with that for a second, because that single decision, turning the car around instead of just buying a $5 charger at the gas station, changed the entire direction of my life. I pulled into the driveway at 10:41 in the morning. Elena's car was there, which wasn't unusual. She worked from home on Tuesdays. What was unusual was the second car parked half a block down the street. A silver sedan I didn't recognize, angled oddly, like someone had parked in a hurry and didn't want to be seen from the house. I noticed it. And then, like an idiot, I ignored it. I walked in through the garage, the door creaking the way it always did, the same creak I'd meant to fix for 2 years. The house was quiet, too quiet for a workday morning. No music from her studio. No sound of her laptop keys. Then I heard it. A voice. A man's voice, low and familiar in a way that made my stomach turn before my brain even caught up to why. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for 11 seconds. I counted them later, replaying it in my head so many times I could time it like a stopwatch. 11 seconds of my old life left before I climbed those stairs and lost it forever. The bedroom door was half open. I remember every detail of what I saw in a way that feels almost cinematic now, like my brain slowed everything down to make sure I'd never be able to forget it, no matter how badly I wanted to. Elena's wedding ring, the one I'd saved 4 months' salary for, sat on the nightstand next to a man's watch. Expensive. Gold. Not something I'd ever seen before. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My throat had closed up like someone had reached in and squeezed it shut. She saw me first. I watched her face go through 4 different emotions in under 2 seconds. Shock, panic, something that almost looked like relief, and then, disturbingly, something close to irritation. Like I was the inconvenience. Like I was the one who'd made a mistake by coming home. The man scrambled for his clothes. I got a look at his face, mid-40s, gray at the temples, the kind of face you'd trust immediately if you met him at a dinner party. I didn't recognize him. That detail would matter more than I could have imagined. It's not what it looks like, Elena said. I want you to think about how insulting that sentence is. It is, almost always, exactly what it looks like. I've heard from people who've lived through this that the line is basically universal, a reflex, not an explanation. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car, and drove to a hotel 40 minutes away because I genuinely did not trust myself to be in that house for one more second. I checked into a room with ugly carpet and a broken ice machine, sat on the edge of the bed, and didn't move for 6 hours. That night, my phone buzzed 43 times. Elena, calling, texting, calling again. I didn't answer a single one. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't find out until much later, was that the man in my bedroom wasn't some random affair. He had a name that would matter enormously in the weeks to come. And Elena knew exactly who he was before she ever let him inside our house. The next few days blur together in my memory, the way trauma tends to compress time. I remember filing for a temporary separation. I remember a lawyer named Denise telling me, gently, that Texas, where we lived, was a community property state, and that meant the divorce would be complicated and expensive no matter how obviously guilty Elena was. I remember standing in the kitchen of the house I could no longer stand to sleep in, packing a suitcase while Elena sat at the table, crying in a way that felt performative, like she was more upset about being caught than about what she'd actually done. Who is he? I finally asked. She wouldn't tell me. Not his name, not how they met, not how long it had been going on. Every question I asked got deflected with a variation of, "It doesn't matter now," or "I never meant to hurt you." I moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the east side of town. Cheap, loud, and humiliatingly close to where we used to get takeout on Friday nights. My job noticed the change in me almost immediately. I was distracted. I missed a deadline for the first time in 6 years. My manager, a decent guy named Frank, pulled me aside and told me to take some time. I didn't take time. I took whiskey. Not in some dramatic, spiraling out of control way, just enough, every night, to make the silence in that apartment a little less loud. 3 weeks after I caught them, I got served divorce papers. Elena had filed first. Her lawyer was aggressive, well-funded, and this detail bothered me more than almost anything else, clearly being paid by someone with serious money. Elena's design business brought in maybe $60,000 a year. This lawyer billed at rates that suggested someone else was footing the bill. I remember sitting in my car outside the courthouse, staring at the retainer letter, thinking, who is paying for this? I had no idea that question was about to lead me somewhere far more dangerous than a divorce court. 6 days after the papers were served, a black Mercedes with tinted windows parked outside my apartment for almost 20 minutes before anyone got out. I noticed it from my window because, frankly, nothing that expensive ever parked on my street. A man stepped out. 60s, silver hair, a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He walked with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once in his life worried about being late. He knocked. I almost didn't answer. I'd become the kind of person who didn't answer doors anymore. But something about the knock, calm and deliberate, made me open it. "You don't know me," he said, "but I know exactly what happened to you. My name is Dominic Kessler. I'd like 10 minutes of your time, and I promise you it will be the most interesting 10 minutes of your year." Every instinct told me to close the door. Every instinct was right, as it turned out. But grief makes you reckless, and curiosity is a hard thing to out-argue when you've got nothing left to lose. I let him in. He didn't sit. He walked around my sad little apartment, glancing at the unwashed dishes and the takeout containers, and said, without any judgment in his voice, "You're allowed to be angry. Most people in your position bury it. That's usually a mistake." Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. He knew the name of the man I'd found in my bedroom. Not just his name, his occupation, his connections, and exactly why Elena's divorce lawyer was being paid for by someone else. "Your wife's boyfriend," Dominic said, "works for a man named Victor Aldrich. And Victor Aldrich owes me a debt he spent 3 years trying to avoid paying." I didn't understand yet how deep that sentence went. I just knew, sitting there in my ruined apartment, that the affair that broke my marriage wasn't some random tragedy. It was a thread, and Dominic Kessler was about to hand me the other end of it. Dominic finally sat down across from me, folding his hands like a man about to negotiate a business deal, not console a broken husband. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. "I run a private investment fund. Some of what I do is legitimate. Some of it operates in spaces most people don't like to think about. You don't need the details. What you need to know is that I have resources most people never get access to, legal, financial, and otherwise." "Why do you care about my marriage?" I asked. "I don't," he said, with a bluntness that almost made me laugh. "I care about Victor Aldrich. He spent years hiding assets from me, laundering money through shell companies, and building a reputation as an untouchable businessman. Your wife's affair happens to run straight through his organization. That makes you useful to me, and it makes me, potentially, very useful to you." Then he made the offer that would define the next 4 months of my life. He proposed setting up a structure, legal on paper, aggressive in practice, that would give me access to over $1 billion in frozen and hidden assets connected to Victor's operation, channeled through a series of legitimate-looking investment vehicles. In exchange, I would help him gather information, financial records, personal schedules, weaknesses, enough to expose Victor publicly, destroy his business empire, and, as a byproduct, obliterate the affair, the lover, and everyone connected to what had happened to me. "You're not asking me to hurt anyone," he clarified, watching my face carefully. "I don't deal in that. I deal in exposure, financial collapse, and public ruin. That's a far more permanent kind of justice than anything violent could ever be." I sat there in silence for almost a full minute. $1 billion. Not for me to keep entirely. A structured share, legally defensible, he claimed, but enough to change my life beyond recognition. And on top of that, the destruction of the man who had systematically dismantled my marriage from the shadows. I should have said no. I said, "Tell me what you need." Dominic didn't rush me into anything that first night. He left a card, no name, just a number, and told me to think it over for a week. I didn't sleep much that week. I researched Dominic Kessler online and found almost nothing. A handful of business filings, a defunct nonprofit board membership from a decade ago, and nothing else. That absence of information told me more than any headline could have. Men who are genuinely powerful rarely need to advertise it. I researched Victor Aldrich next, and here the picture was clearer, if still incomplete. He owned a chain of luxury real estate developments across 3 states, sat on the boards of 2 charities, and had, according to a single buried lawsuit from 6 years earlier, been accused, and cleared, of financial fraud involving investor funds. The lover's name, I finally learned from a co-worker of Elena's who felt guilty enough to tell me, was Marcus Whitfield. Officially, Marcus was a senior development consultant for one of Victor's companies. Unofficially, according to Dominic, Marcus was the man Victor used to manage relationships with people he wanted leverage over, spouses of business partners, disgruntled employees, anyone whose personal life could be turned into professional advantage. That detail rearranged everything I thought I understood. Elena hadn't just cheated on me with some random man she'd met at a coffee shop. She had been targeted. I called Dominic back on the 6th day. "I'll do it," I told him. "But I want to know everything. No more half-truths." There was a pause on the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Careful what you ask for," he finally said. "Some truths don't let you go back to who you were before you knew them." I didn't listen. I never do. The plan, as Dominic explained it, unfolded in phases. Phase 1 was information gathering, quiet, patient, almost boring in its methodical pace. I was given access to a small team, a forensic accountant named Priya, who could trace shell companies through 6 layers of paperwork, and a former journalist named Roland who specialized in finding the kind of documents that companies spent enormous amounts of money trying to bury. My role was smaller than I expected, and in hindsight, that should have worried me more than it did. I was mostly asked to provide access. Old emails between Elena and her design clients that might reference Victor's companies, financial records from our joint accounts that could establish a paper trail, and eventually, a meeting with Elena herself, arranged under false pretenses, that would let Roland's hidden recorder capture her talking about Marcus's real role in Victor's organization. I told myself this was justice. I told myself Elena deserved to be exposed for what she'd done, and that Victor deserved to lose the empire he'd built on other people's misery. The meeting with Elena happened at a coffee shop we used to go to on Sunday mornings, back when things were good. She looked thinner than before, the strain of the divorce visible in the hollows under her eyes. Part of me, the part one hated most, felt a flicker of the old affection. I asked her, gently, whether Marcus had ever mentioned Victor's business dealings. I framed it as idle curiosity, the kind of question a soon-to-be ex-husband might ask out of morbid interest. What she said next confirmed everything Dominic had told me, and opened up a question I hadn't thought to ask yet. Marcus didn't choose me, she said quietly, staring into her coffee. Victor told him to. I felt the floor tilt under me for the second time in a month. What do you mean, told him to? I asked. Elena looked up, and for the first time since I'd caught her, I saw something in her face that looked almost like fear. You're not the only one being used in this, she said. None of us are. I left that coffee shop with my hands shaking so badly, I had to sit in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive. Elena's words rattled around in my head for days. You're not the only one being used in this. What did that mean? Was she trying to manipulate me again, shifting blame the way she'd tried to when I first caught her? Or was there something bigger happening that neither of us fully understood? I brought it to Dominic the next time we met. In a private room at the back of a restaurant he apparently owned a controlling stake in, though his name appeared nowhere on the paperwork. He listened without interrupting, which I'd learned by then was rare for him. Interesting, he said finally. That tracks with something Priya found in the financial records. Victor's company has been paying a monthly retainer to Marcus for the last 4 years, categorized as client relations consulting. For years, Marcus has had exactly one recurring client relationship documented under that title. Elena, I said. Elena, he confirmed. Which means this wasn't a spontaneous affair born out of romantic chemistry. It was arranged. Likely to gain leverage over you. Specifically. Why me? I asked. I'm not important. I sell commercial insurance. Dominic slid a folder across the table. Inside was a printout of an insurance policy I had underwritten 18 months earlier. A massive commercial property policy for a real estate development in the same county where Victor Aldrich had been quietly buying up land through shell companies. You approved coverage terms on a property that Victor needed insured under very specific conditions to hide certain liabilities, Dominic said. You didn't know it, but you were an obstacle. And then, 6 weeks after that policy went through, Marcus Whitfield started coincidentally showing up at your wife's design studio as a client. I sat there, feeling something curdle in my stomach that was worse than the betrayal itself. The affair wasn't about Elena falling for someone else. It was never about love at all. It was a business transaction, and I was the target the whole time. This is the part of the story where everything I thought I understood got rewritten. I had walked into this arrangement with Dominic believing I was the wronged husband getting help from a powerful stranger to expose the people who'd hurt me. What I learned next made me question whether help had ever been the right word for what Dominic was actually offering. Priya, the forensic accountant, requested an emergency meeting 3 weeks into the investigation. She'd found something in the layered shell company structure that didn't fit the pattern of Victor hiding assets from Dominic. It fit the pattern of Dominic hiding assets through Victor. The billion-dollar figure Dominic had promised me wasn't sitting in some frozen account waiting to be unlocked through legal pressure on Victor. It existed, technically, but it was tangled inside a web of investment vehicles that Dominic himself had created years earlier. Vehicles that, if exposed publicly the way we were building toward, would implicate him just as thoroughly as Victor. In other words, I wasn't a tool for uncovering someone else's crime. I was being positioned as the fall guy who would take the public heat if the exposure ever went wrong, while Dominic quietly walked away with a restructured, legitimate claim to assets that had once belonged to both men in some earlier, murkier arrangement I still didn't fully understand. Elena's warning made horrifying sense now. You're not the only one being used in this. She wasn't talking about Victor using Marcus. She was talking about Dominic using me. I remember sitting in my car outside Priya's office, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process the fact that the man who'd offered me justice for my broken marriage had, in reality, recruited a grieving, furious, financially desperate man specifically because grieving, furious, desperate men don't ask enough questions before they sign things. I had already signed several things. I confronted Dominic 2 days later, in the same back room of the restaurant, my hands shaking with an anger I hadn't felt since the morning I found that watch on my nightstand. You used me, I said. This was never about justice. I was insurance. Something to burn if the plan went wrong. Dominic didn't deny it. That, somehow, made it worse than if he'd tried to lie. You're partly right, he said. But you're also partly wrong. Everything I told you about Victor is true. He did target you. He did use Marcus to gain leverage. Elena, whatever her reasons, did betray you under manipulation that started long before she ever met him romantically. None of that changes because my own arrangement with Victor is more complicated than I let on. So what happens now? I asked. I walk away and you two work out whatever twisted business dispute you have. Or, Dominic said, leaning forward, you finish what we started, with your eyes fully open this time, and you take a structured settlement that's smaller than $1 billion but completely clean, nothing that ties back to me, nothing that makes you a target once the dust settles. Enough to rebuild your entire life. Enough that Victor's collapse still happens, Marcus loses everything, and Elena has to live with the public exposure of exactly how she was used and what she allowed to happen. I sat with that offer for a long time. The $1 billion had never really been real. But something smaller, cleaner, and still enormous, enough to matter, was still on the table, if I was willing to keep going with a clear understanding of exactly whose game I was playing. I thought about the 11 seconds I'd stood at the bottom of those stairs. I thought about Elena's face when she said it's not what it looks like. I thought about a man named Marcus, sent by a stranger, to destroy a marriage as a business strategy. Fine, I said. But this time, I write my own exit clause. Dominic smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Now you're finally thinking like someone who deserves to win this. The final phase moved faster than anything before it. Roland's recordings, Priya's financial trail, and my own insurance industry knowledge came together into a single, devastating package. Proof that Victor Aldrich had knowingly hidden liabilities on properties I'd underwritten, proof that he directed Marcus to manipulate Elena as leverage, and financial records showing the shell company structure that connected all of it. Dominic's lawyers packaged the material and delivered it, not to the press first, but to the State Insurance Commission and a federal financial crimes unit. A move Dominic insisted was smarter than public exposure, because government investigations freeze assets faster than headlines do. I sat in my apartment above the laundromat the night the raids happened, watching a muted news alert scroll across my phone. A regional real estate developer's offices searched by federal agents. Assets frozen pending investigation. Spokesperson declining to comment. Victor Aldrich's empire didn't collapse in some dramatic Hollywood explosion. It collapsed the way most modern crimes do, quietly, through subpoenas, frozen bank accounts, and a slow-motion unraveling of a reputation built over 20 years. Marcus Whitfield was named in the filing as a person of interest regarding the manipulation of at least 4 other targeted relationships beyond Elena's. A detail that made my stomach turn, because it meant I hadn't been the only man whose marriage had been weaponized this way. There were others. Other broken families. Other betrayed spouses who'd never know why their world fell apart the way mine had. Until now. Elena called me the morning the news broke. I almost didn't answer. I did, in the end, mostly out of a curiosity I couldn't fully explain. They're saying Marcus targeted me deliberately, she said, her voice hollow. That none of it was real. Not even a little. I didn't know what to say to that. Because as angry as I still was, I understood, for the first time, that Elena had been a victim of something too, just a different kind than me. Dominic's part of the arrangement came due 2 weeks later, in a meeting that felt entirely different from everyone before it. No back room this time, a lawyer's office downtown, sunlight through tall windows, papers already printed and waiting. The settlement was smaller than $1 billion, exactly as he'd said it would be. A structured payout tied to my original insurance claim, damages related to professional targeting, and a confidential arrangement that, on paper, looked like nothing more than a very generous legal settlement from Victor's collapsing companies. $42 million, clean, taxed, and legally mine. It should have felt like victory. Sitting there, signing documents that would let me leave that apartment above the laundromat forever, I expected something like triumph. Instead, I felt strangely hollow. I thought about the 11 seconds on the stairs. I thought about Elena's face and Marcus's watch on the nightstand, and the 4 other families Dominic's lawyers had confirmed were also affected by Victor's manipulation schemes. Families who would never get an offer like the one I'd received, because they didn't happen to have an insurance policy that made them useful to a man like Dominic Kessler. I asked him, before I signed the final page, why he'd really chosen me instead of simply going after Victor through his own resources from the start. Because broken men make excellent instruments, he said, without a trace of apology in his voice. You needed someone to blame, and I needed someone the public would believe was simply defending himself. It worked out for both of us. That's usually how these things go. I signed the papers anyway. $42 million is a hard thing to walk away from on principle, and I'm not going to pretend I'm a better man than I actually am. But I left that office knowing something I hadn't understood the day Dominic first knocked on my door. Revenge, even successful revenge, doesn't hand you back the person you were before the betrayal. It just hands you a different version of yourself and asks you to live with him. It's been 8 months since the settlement went through. I don't live above the laundromat anymore. I bought a small house 2 states away, in a town where nobody knows my name or my story, and I've spent most of that time doing something I never expected, nothing at all. No grand plans. No revenge. Just quiet mornings and long walks, and the slow, unglamorous work of figuring out who I am when I'm not defined by anger. Victor Aldrich is currently facing federal charges related to fraud and financial manipulation. His case is still working through the courts. Marcus Whitfield lost his job, his reputation, and, according to someone who used to know him, his marriage, which is a strange, uncomfortable kind of irony I still haven't fully made peace with. Elena and I finalized our divorce quietly. We don't speak often, but we speak sometimes. And there's something almost like understanding between us now. 2 people who were both used as pieces in a game neither of us asked to play. Dominic Kessler, as far as I know, walked away from all of it exactly as clean as he'd promised he would. I don't know if that means he was telling the truth about caring, even a little, or if I was simply the most convenient tool he found for a job he was always going to finish one way or another. Here's what I've come to believe. Sitting with all of this for 8 months, revenge feels like justice in the moment you're chasing it. It feels like the only thing that could possibly balance the scales after someone shatters your trust. But real justice, the kind that actually heals something, rarely comes wrapped in someone else's billion-dollar agenda. It comes slower, quieter, and usually without anyone applauding you for finding it. I don't regret everything that happened. Victor deserved to be exposed. Marcus deserved to face what he'd done to multiple families, not just mine. But I've stopped believing that the version of me who sat in that restaurant backroom, hungry for revenge, was actually the version of me I wanted to become. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, I hope you find whatever your version of peace looks like, and I hope it costs you a lot less than mine did. If this story moved you, Hit like, drop a comment telling me whether you would have taken Dominic's offer, and subscribe for more stories like this one every week. And if you want to see what happened when Elena finally told her side of the story in full, that video is coming soon, and trust me, it changes things again. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.